Have you ever wondered about the laws that govern wartime economies? A question that might seem out of the blue, but in the world of international trade and policy, it's a question with profound implications. As we delve into the fascinating realm of wartime economics, we uncover a complex web of laws and regulations that have shaped our history. One such law that stands out is the Trading with the Enemy Act. Now you might be thinking, trading with the enemy? That sounds like a plot from a spy novel. But rest assured, it's a real piece of legislation, and it's an essential part of the puzzle when we talk about international trade during times of conflict. You see, in the grand scheme of things, war doesn't just involve soldiers on a battlefield. It extends far beyond that, reaching into the realms of economics and commerce. The goods that cross borders, the currencies that change hands, and the transactions that take place are all part of the war effort. During these tumultuous times, the usual rules of trade are often upended. Countries that were once trading partners can suddenly find themselves on opposing sides of a conflict. And in these situations, the lines between friend and foe can blur. This is where the Trading with the Enemy Act comes into play. It's a legal tool used by governments to control and regulate trade during times of war. But it's not just about restricting trade. The Trading with the Enemy Act also has a role in maintaining the integrity of a country's economy and protecting its interests. It's a balancing act, one that involves weighing the needs of a nation against the realities of war. The Trading with the Enemy Act is more than just a piece of legislation. It's a reflection of the complexities and challenges that come with conducting international trade during times of war. It's an unseen act, often overlooked, but its impact is far-reaching. So what exactly is the Trading with the Enemy Act, you ask? Well, sit tight as we unravel the layers of this intriguing piece of legislation in our next segment. To understand this act, we must journey back to its origins in 1917. In the throes of the Great War, a conflict that rattled the very foundations of civilization, the United States found itself in a precarious position. The country was at war, and its economy was intertwined with nations it was now in conflict with. In this backdrop, the Trading with the Enemy Act was born, a legislative response to a complex problem. Its purpose was twofold. First, to control and regulate trade with nations the United States was at war with, and second, to protect the American economy from the perils of wartime trading. It was a sweeping piece of legislation, granting the President of the United States the power to prohibit, limit, or regulate trade with enemy nations. This act was not just a tool for wartime strategy, but it was also a safeguard for the American economy. It served as a buffer, insulating the United States from the economic instability that war often brings. By controlling trade with enemy nations, the act prevented the flow of resources to those nations, thereby impacting their ability to wage war. At the same time, it protected American businesses from the risks associated with trading in a war-torn world. The act had profound implications for the U.S. economy. It shifted the economic landscape, redirecting trade flows and reshaping the country's economic relationships. It created new opportunities for American businesses, opening up markets previously dominated by enemy nations. At the same time, it challenged existing business models, forcing companies to adapt to a new reality. The impact of the Trading with the Enemy Act was far-reaching, its echoes reverberating through the decades. It set precedents for how the United States would handle trade during times of conflict, shaping the country's economic policy in profound ways. Fast forward to the present day, the act still holds significant relevance. It serves as a reminder of the complex interplay between economics and warfare, and the delicate balance that must be struck in times of conflict. Over the years, the Trading with the Enemy Act has evolved and morphed into a complex piece of legislation. From its inception in the early 20th century, the act has seen countless amendments and revisions, each one shaping and redefining its purpose and influence. A significant transformation occurred during the dark days of World War II. As the world was engulfed in conflict, the act was expanded to include not just actual enemies, but also allies of enemies. This broadened the scope of the act, allowing the U.S. government to prohibit or regulate trade with a wider range of countries than before. However, the act did not stop evolving with the end of the war. As the world moved into the frosty grip of the Cold War, the act again adapted to the changing geopolitical landscape. The act was amended to allow the president to impose economic sanctions in peacetime, a change that reflected the growing complexity of international relations and the need for more nuanced tools of diplomacy. The act's evolution continued into the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Its scope was extended to include not just nations, but also individuals and organizations. This allowed the U.S. government to target specific entities involved in activities deemed harmful to national security or foreign policy interests. But perhaps one of the most impactful changes was the introduction of the concept of national emergencies. This gave the president the power to declare a national emergency and use the act to respond to threats that didn't necessarily entail war. This was a significant departure from the act's original purpose and marked a new era in its evolution. Despite its evolution, the act remains a powerful tool in the U.S. government's arsenal. Its changes over time reflect the shifting dynamics of global politics and the continual need for effective instruments of foreign policy. As we look to the future, it's clear that the Trading with the Enemy Act will continue to evolve, adapting to the challenges and complexities of our ever-changing world. In the 21st century, the Trading with the Enemy Act continues to shape our world in subtle ways. The act, while over a century old, remains a potent tool in the arsenal of international policy. Its applications have evolved, keeping pace with the complexities of our modern world. Today, the act is less about outright warfare and more about economic strategy. It's wielded like a finely honed blade in the chess game of international politics. It's not just about banning trade with enemies during times of war. It now extends to matters of national security, human rights, and even environmental concerns. For instance, the act has been invoked to impose embargoes on nations suspected of sponsoring terrorism or those violating human rights. It's been a powerful tool in the hands of policymakers, enabling them to exert pressure where diplomatic negotiations may have failed. Moreover, the act has grown in scope to influence global economies. It can shape the fate of nations, dictating who they trade with and how. The ripple effect of these decisions can influence everything from the price of goods in your local supermarket to the kind of cars you see on the road. Its reach has also extended beyond nations. Today, the act can target specific entities, be they corporations or individuals, who are deemed to pose a threat. This ability to target non-state actors reflects the evolving nature of threats in the modern world. Yet, the act is not without its critics. Some argue that its broad powers can be misused, leading to unnecessary economic hardship. Others contend that it can inadvertently strengthen the very entities it's meant to weaken by driving them to seek alternative, often illicit sources of revenue. Nevertheless, the Trading with the Enemy Act remains a cornerstone of international policy. It's a testament to the far-sightedness of those who drafted it and its adaptability to the changing times. The Trading with the Enemy Act, a century-old legislation, continues to impact our lives in ways we might not even realize. So, let's draw together the threads of our discussion. The Trading with the Enemy Act, a seemingly obscure piece of legislation, has been an essential part of our journey through history. Born out of the necessities of World War I, it was a tool that allowed the U.S. government to control foreign trade during times of conflict. In its infancy, the act was a response to a world at war. It was designed to prevent enemy nations from benefiting from American commerce. It allowed the president to restrict, regulate, or prevent trade and financial transactions with hostile countries. A bold move certainly, but one that was deemed necessary in the face of a global crisis. As we moved through the decades, the act evolved. It was not just a static piece of legislation, but a living, breathing entity that changed with the times. During the Cold War, it was used as a means of economic warfare against communist countries. In more recent times, it has been employed as a tool to impose economic sanctions against nations deemed to be a threat to U.S. national security or world peace. And where does this leave us today? The act continues to play a significant role in U.S. foreign policy. It is still used as a tool to manage international trade during times of conflict or crisis. It allows the U.S. government to protect its interests and those of its allies, while simultaneously exerting pressure on hostile nations. In essence, the Trading with the Enemy Act is a testament to the power of legislation. It shows us how a single act can shape international trade, influence foreign policy, and impact global politics. It's a reminder that laws are not just words on paper, but powerful tools that can change the world. From an obscure piece of wartime legislation to a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy, the Trading with the Enemy Act has certainly left its mark on history.